Pinewood, South Carolina, has a history that includes interesting people, a railroad station, a landfill, and a park. From Anderson to Witherspoon, prior to the construction of the railroad, 124 surnames could be found in the area. David Gallard, like many in the Low Country, was a descendant of French Huguenots who came to the area to escape persecution. Many of David's ancestors became prominent members in the South Carolina colony. David's parents were Samuel Isaac Gallard and Susan Richardson DuBose, who are laid to rest in Pinewood at St. Mark's. On David's mother's side, his grandparents include David St. Pierre DuBose and Margaret Ann Boyd DuBose. And his great-grandparents were Dr. John Boyd and Susan Richardson Boyd, whom are both buried in Pinewood at the James Boyd Jefferson Cemetery. As a result, David's great-great-great-grandfather was General Richard Richardson, who was well known for his bravery during the Cherokee Wars and a patriot linked to Francis Marion and his success. On David's father's side, David's grandparents were David Gallard and Louise DuBose Gallard, making his great-grandparents Samuel DuBose, a Marion adjunct, and Mary Walter DuBose, both of whom are laid to rest in the historic church of St. Stephen's in Berkeley County. David was born at his parents' summer home at Fulton's Crossroads, now in Pinewood, in 1859. As a young boy, he and his family lived with his grandfather, Peter DuBose of Clarendon. But by 1872, David moved in with his grandmother in Winnsboro, South Carolina, to attend the Mount Zion Institute. Like many families in South Carolina, after the war between the states, David's family found themselves in a precarious situation. As a result, David started working as a clerk at McMaster's General Store. Eventually, David's friend and future brother-in-law, R. Means Davis, persuaded him to go back to school to continue his education, which David did, becoming one of the first native Southerners to enter West Point after the Civil War. By 1884, David had become a second lieutenant of engineering. He then went to work in Florida and at the Mexican border. By 1887, David married his friend's sister, Catherine Davis. In 1898, when the Spanish-American War began, David enlisted under Major General Wade and was raised to the rank of colonel while serving in Cuba. It is written that during David's life, he served his country more effectively than most men. His most striking characteristic was a marked alertness and determination to know every detail of his work. This, along with his genius for administration and organization, coupled with his indefeatable energy, led to many accomplishments throughout his life. Eventually, this led David to overseeing the construction of the Panama Canal, a task so difficult that today it is considered a modern marvel. After 9 years of never-ending tiresome work, David suffered a mental breakdown. Later, rather than stress, David's worsening condition was blamed on an intracranial growth. In a result to relieve David from his mental distress, an operation was performed, from which David never regained consciousness. After 3 months at Johns Hopkins, David passed away on December 5, 1913, a year prior to the canal's completion. David was laid to rest at Arlington Cemetery. Notably, in 1937, his wife joined him there. Sadly, while his marker is a point of interest that I would suggest you visit, during our visit, we noticed that his historic plaque is now missing. Captain Robert W. Andrews, known to many as Cap, was a famous citizen who, while not born in Pinewood, was laid to rest here in 1894 at the Pinewood Cemetery. Born in 1790 in Statesburg, South Carolina, Robert was one of 12 children. Robert's father was a wagon maker, and as a young man, Robert found work using wagons to transport supplies to Boston or Charleston. Later, Robert would take on many odd jobs that would lead him to travel, like driving a stagecoach. During his travels, Robert wrote extensively about his adventures and encounters with wildlife. Eventually, Robert married a wealthy widow and purchased a hotel. However, he of course continued to take many odd jobs, even some which by today's standards are taboo, such as hunting a runaway slave and later a stolen stallion. During his life, Robert and John Boyd found themselves in a knife fight during a game of poker with some cheating scoundrels, but lived to play another day. Later, Robert also raised and butchered his own meat after buying a herd of wild cattle in the watery swamp. Later, Robert started providing hunting guide services for those staying in his hotel for a fee. Then he became a Charleston horse trader. During the Civil War, Robert served under General Hood as a veterinary surgeon and an overseer of a black driving team. Near the end of the war, Robert became a captain and barely escaped from Porter and his men. In fact, while some of the men Robert oversaw left to join the Yankee forces, some of his men stayed with him and hid in the swamp. After the war, Robert was appointed as chief of police during a time when increased racism and hate crimes occurred. However, it wasn't the previously mentioned adventures that made Robert famous, but what he did afterwards, which was walk to visit his family throughout the United States. In 1886, the Boston Globe wrote, Captain Robert W. Anderson of Sumter, South Carolina, well deserves the reputation as a great American traveler. He is now 96 years old and in the past 2 years has traveled upwards to 7,000 miles in his pedestrian trips through the country. During these walks, Robert would often stop in pursuit of various interests. At one point, he became interested in shipbuilding during a visit to the state of Maine. After building 2 ships, he traveled again, this time to New York, where he raised bees and marketed honey. Notably, much of his travels took place with his dog Fido, who during the travels was stolen, but eventually recovered by Robert. Through Robert's 104-year life, he also found time to marry twice and father 12 children. While reading the book, The History of Pinewood, South Carolina and Its People, I was astonished at the large section on murder and crime. This book makes for a very hard read, but it does paint a picture of how racial tensions, poverty, wrongful convictions, and vigilante justice led to many outrageous actions by those who lived in the area. Some of the well-covered stories are as follows. The story of J.B. Mims, who was shot dead by William Bethune, a man who had stolen Mims' horses and buggy in 1909. After his first trial, Willie was sentenced to death by hanging. While a man of poor means, enough people came together to help Willie, and a new lawyer was hired in time for a second trial. After his second trial, Willie was given the death penalty by electric chair. However, for some reason, his case again went before the Supreme Court, and this time he was given the death penalty by life in prison. This case is truly a confusing one, which has an even more baffling ending, as Willie ended up escaping prison by going into the watery swamp. While it is believed that he was shot and drowned, no body has ever been recovered. In 1915, there is another interesting story involving Joel Green, who was a suspect in a robbery. As a result, hounds were brought into the area and a posse formed, though some refused to join the posse as Green was regarded to as a half-wit. Sadly, the dogs were able to tree Green before he was shot to death under the Duckford Tunnel. Even more shocking to the story, Joel's distraught mother, Mattie Green, cursed all involved and the town. And it is this curse that has been attributed to the town's small amount of growth. Even the town's mayor was murdered in his home. E. Clyde Getting was influential and popular. He was even the superintendent at his church, but took a very active stance against bootleggers, and this led to his early death. Moonshine was commonly found in the Big Bay and Weeks Mill Pond area, the latter of which is now enclosed in the Shaw Air Force Base bombing range. While not mentioned in the book, perhaps no murder is more well known in the area than the one that Pinewood-born George J. Steiny Jr. was blamed and convicted for. After his wrongful conviction, George became the youngest person ever electrocuted at the mere age of only 14. The bodies of Betty J. Binnicker and Mary E. Thames were found in a ditch in a town that George's father had moved them to for work. When the girls failed to return home that night, a search party went out. When their young bodies were found, it was discovered that George was the last person to see the girls alive while they were searching for maypops. Sadly, he was starved until he confessed. Being so small, during George's execution, he had to sit on a book, and the adult face covering came off, revealing a gruesome sight. In 2004, after much persuasion by George's siblings, the case was reopened and he was found innocent. In 2022, the George Steiny Fund was created, which makes the state of South Carolina pay $10 million to families of the wrongly executed if their conviction is ever overturned. As I studied more notable figures from Pinewood, I came across Darrell Adams, a tight end for USC, and several NFL teams. John Lawrence Manning, the 65th governor of South Carolina from 1852 to 1854. Reginald L. Pleasant, a Clemson and NFL football player, defensive linebacker. However, I decided that I would talk about John W. Osteen Jr., who died at the age of 91 in 2018. John's life was shaped by being raised on a small farm near Pinewood, South Carolina. His father died when John was 5, changing his life forever. When he, his mother, and 2 sisters moved in with his maternal grandparents, aunts, and uncles. He was surrounded by love and affection of a large family and learned a strong work ethic through life on the farm. He learned to plow with a mule at the age of 9 and developed a love for the outdoors during his youth. He left the farm when he was 22 and married the love of his life, Essie Gettings. At 39, John found a career in the textile industry as a printer at Clearwater Finishing Plant in Aiken County. Upon John's retirement, he returned to the outdoors, where he fished, hunted dogs, and raised beagles. John was a marvelous storyteller and would often talk about his time on the farm in rural South Carolina. Eventually, his love for storytelling and history led John to publish the book, The History of Pinewood, South Carolina and Its People. Besides being an author, during his life, John was very dedicated to collecting tools and artifacts for the Confederate Museum. He and his wife also helped educate the public through living history. Upon leaving his home and going into assisted living in 2017, he donated a log cabin and a one-room schoolhouse to the Sons of the Confederacy. The structures were moved to the reenactment site for the Battle of Aiken, and today the public can still enjoy John's cabin and schoolhouse. Put bluntly, if you're planning on getting John's book, first know this book was written by a man who was very enthusiastic about the history of the Civil War. In addition, the book is quite one-sided. However, that being said, it leaves a great opportunity for someone to write a book which depicts the history of the Black people who live in the Pinewood area and have their stories told. In John's book, he tells of old crazy Mary, a Black woman with mental health issues, who walked from Pinewood to Paxville every day with her dog barefoot, sweeping people's yards for food. Mary even shared with John that she believed that she had been cursed by her grandmother to have such a hard life. Besides being feared by many children, Mary was really well beloved. So when she passed penniless, the Blackwell and Jennings Funeral Home dressed her in a beautiful white dress and buried her at Black Calvary Church. John also tells of how he and his cousin hid under a bridge and scared his two sisters so bad they ran right out of their shoes. How he scared his sister trying to come into the outhouse, and how he hit his sister in the head with a sack of marbles for changing his Lone Ranger radio program to soaps. As a result, John also spoke about how fast his mother was at switching him. In his book, John also tells many short stories about his granddaddy's old shotgun they named Old Tom. John tells about how his half-blind aunt loved telling stories and one day mistook her coat for a snake, and it was blown to pieces by Old Tom. How John's grandma had grabbed Old Tom when she heard the children screaming, only to find out that Edgar was hit on the head by Richard with an old metal lock. How Grandpa had missed shooting a rabid dog and later missed shooting at a hawk and inadvertently killed 25 chicks in the brooder house. John then finishes up by talking about how Henry used Old Tom to shoot a rattlesnake that had fallen on him while using the privy. In John's book, he also recalls fishing and looking for gators in the Weeks Mills Pond, and swimming in an area known as the Wash Hole below Marvin's Mills Bridge. While I believe the author of Pinewood's book was really into true crime, the people of Pinewood were not always fighting one another. Examples of this can be seen in the 1886 earthquake, the 1922 fire that caused $20,000 in damages, the 1925 storm, which was one of the worst storms ever recorded. In addition, both blacks and whites came together to fight in World War I and suffered greatly shortly after that in the influenza pandemic. The community had to help sustain each other after the destructive boll weevil ate most of the cotton produced in the county. Then there was the stock market crash, which most of the people of Pinewood knew nothing about due to the Clemson and Carolina game that was being hosted the same day. Of course, just like any other area in the world, the town of Pinewood had no choice but to come together, even in more recent wars, natural disasters, and pandemics. While it is true that there was always a farming community in the area, it did struggle as many other southern communities did after the Civil War and Reconstruction. However, after the area's poor roads were addressed, and with the coming of the railroad, the area really began to prosper and merchants began to move here. The town grew around the railroad station, which was completed in 1889 and became part of the Atlantic Coast Line Railroad. When the town was christened here, celebration was held at the new depot, which was pleasantly decorated with beautiful wreaths. After the arrival of the Sumter train, a dance was held in which the music was provided by the African American membered string band of Sumter. Unfortunately, as trains do, the train did not only bring prosperity to the area. On April the 21st of 1890, a horrible accident occurred around 8 p.m. as passengers came back from Sumter. Miss Childers and a little boy named Shuford Griffin were suddenly struck by a freight car on a side track. The car threw Mrs. Childers' body, almost tearing her torso in half. The young boy had to have his arm amputated and lost a few toes. Ultimately, the two men in charge at the time were not found guilty of murder, as it was an accident, but the Atlantic Coast Rail Line had to pay the families for their loss. Then, in 1896, Mr. Powell Green came to his death by leaving the train while it was still in motion before reaching the station. From a newspaper clipping in 1922, a man by the name of Richard was also killed on the tracks near Pinewood after falling asleep on the tracks, which I'm learning happens more than one might expect. By 1895, Pinewood had grown and had one doctor, 6 stores, 6 cotton gins, 2 grist mills, 2 blacksmith shops, 2 Methodist churches, 2 restaurants, 2 boarding houses, and a population of 250. While the town of Pinewood started out in Clarendon County and was originally named Clarendon, county boundary lines were redrawn in the early 1800s, and the town became part of Sumter County, and the name was then changed to Pinewood in 1902. Unfortunately for Pinewood, as with many other railroad towns, with the increase of interstate travel, the railroad suffered. Passenger service stopped in Pinewood in the mid-1950s. However, the beautiful depot still stands today as a testament to a time when the railroad was king. The depot also makes for a must-stop location when visiting or just driving through Pinewood. In more recent history, the town of Pinewood is most often associated with the Pinewood site. The Pinewood site was a claystone mine from 1972 to 1978, then a landfill, and finally a hazardous waste site after 1980. The Pinewood site began closing in 2000, and as of today, all of the landfill cells have been closed and capped. The site will remain in post-closure care for at least the next 100 years. As of today, Pinewood has also grown to a little over 1,000 residents from 500 residents in 2010. While Pinewood once had a dark past full of crime and racism, today the inhabitants get along well. And Pinewood has a crime rate below 1%, making Pinewood a wonderful place to move if you're looking for small town charm with the ability to drive to the larger town of Sumter. Next, I'll be talking about the things that you can do while visiting Pinewood. While exploring Pinewood, we ended up driving by the Milford Plantation, which is definitely one of the biggest attractions in Pinewood. Milford Plantation, located just outside of the town, was built in 1839 by Nathaniel P. Potter for future South Carolina Governor John Lawrence Manning. When first built, some called the house Manning's Folly because it was such a grand home in such a remote location. At the very end of the Civil War, a remarkable coincidence saved the house from being burned by Union soldiers. On what turned out to be the final day of the war, Northern troops led by Brigadier General Edward Elmer Potter arrived at Milford. John Manning met General Potter at the front door and said, "Well, the house was built by a Potter, and it is as though it will be destroyed by a Potter." General Potter responded, "No, you are protected. Nathaniel Potter was my brother." Milford Plantation remained in the Manning family until 1902. And it continued to be used as a residence until the 1990s. Today, the house is on the National Register of Historic Places and is sometimes open to the public for guided tours. While in Pinewood, you can also find the location of the town's old school. The prominent people who lived in Pinewood saw the need for a school. The first schoolhouse was built in 1890. The initial class had 20 children who were taught by Miss Keels and Miss Fedler. In 1908, a $10,000 building was built to house the high school and the grade school. This building was used until 1930 when Aridus Memorial School united with Pinewood. During the 30s and 40s, the high school had a good sports program consisting of baseball, basketball, and football. By 1940, a gymnasium was built. However, eventually, due to the lack of town growth and the increase of cars, Pinewood Elementary was closed, and eventually so was the high school. While in Pinewood, we also went to see the historic St. Mark's Episcopal Church and some nearby historical markers. An early plantation owner in this area, he was commissioner of St. Mark's Church, who donated land for its construction. He was a magistrate and delegate to the First and Second Provincial Congress. In the Revolution, he was a colonel in the Snow Campaign and later brigadier general. 6 governors of South Carolina are among his descendants. Milford Plantation, Milford, 1 mile west, is the finest Greek Revival house in South Carolina and one of the finest in America. It was built in 1839 to 1841 for John Lawrence Manning, a planter, state legislator, and governor from 1852 to 1854. And his wife Susan Hampton Manning, a daughter of General Wade Hampton. Some contemporaries who thought it was extravagant called the mansion Manning's Folly. The 3-story stucco-over brick house features a massive portico with 6 fluted Corinthian columns. Notable interior features include a dome and oculus over a circular stair and double parlors. Many elaborate interior furnishings are designed from Menard Lefebvre's Beauties of Modern Architecture, 1835. Milford was designated a National Historic Landmark in 1973. St. Mark's Episcopal Church. By Act of Assembly, St. Mark's Parish was established in 1757. The first church stood at Halfway Swamp. Others were built near Williamsburg-Sumter Line, near Rimini, and near this site. These 4 churches were abandoned or burned. Soldiers and patriots of the Revolution were members of St. Mark's Parish. The present church, designed by Edward C. Jones and Francis D. Lee of Charleston, was built of brick and made of local clay on land given by R.C. Richardson and R.I. Manning. The cornerstones were laid by Bishop Thos F. Davis, February 1854, and church consecrated March 1855. 6 governors and many notable citizens worshipped here. Of course, one thing that the people of the past and today still do is go to church. And if you're really interested in Pinewood's history, you can visit their churches. Not only is there old St. Mark's Church, but there is also a very old church on the dirt road leading between Milford Plantation and Pinewood Lake Park. In addition to those, while in downtown Pinewood, there is a lovely old church called Pinewood United Methodist. While in Pinewood, you may want to visit Mills Creek Park. Online, this park and campground is referred to as a hidden gem. The park, while it has no playgrounds, does have a beautiful lake and weeping willows. The park also marks the location of a trailhead for the Palmetto Trail, and the people who come here to hike often hike all the way to the Poinsett State Park. Online, it states that the campground has 130 sites, but rarely more than 5 are ever occupied. The pond is also described as a nice place to canoe. In one man's review, he was delighted with his trip as he ate persimmons that grew wild there the entire time he was there. The place is also said to be very good for dogs, a perfect place to mountain bike. Peaceful, tranquil, and cozy. A beautiful place to camp, especially with horses. Great trails, clear and well marked, and a wonderful place for meditation. In addition, the park is also a wedding venue and has a 1940s era lodge that's used not only for weddings but parties. As you can see from my video, the park has 20 stables, which makes this an ideal place for equestrian lovers. Many people take their horses and explore Manchester State Forest. Of course, while you're at the park, you can also fish. By the way, fishing and hunting have always been very popular pastimes in Pinewood. And it may be the #1 reason why people come to visit. If you're interested in hunting, you can always join a hunt club or go to Featherhorn Farms. As far as fishing goes, there are several wonderful places to fish in and near Pinewood. As a young man while fishing, John recalled that he would leave Sparkleberry, go past Billiards Mount to McGrist Lake, on to the Otter Flat, and Riser's Old River. These were some of his favorite places to fish. John also recounts in May of 1939, work finally began on the Santee Cooper project, and thousands of people were hired to clear the swamp before Lake Marion was created. Apparently, Pinewood residents found this to be amazing and loved watching the creation of this lake. Of course, the main attraction that led us to visit Pinewood, South Carolina, was the Possum Trot Festival. The Possum Trot Festival began in 1982 and got its name from the area's abundance of possums. It was such a success that the festival continued annually until Hurricane Hugo hit in 1989. After that, the town struggled to host a festival as people continued to rebuild their lives. Residents revived the festival in May of 1994, but once again lost traction. The Pinewood Activity League volunteers brought back the festival in September of 2024 after almost 30 years. The festival was held on September the 6th and Saturday, September the 7th at 20 East Clark Street. The festival included live bands, vendors, children rides, a fishing competition, a tractor pull, a dog treeing competition, a beauty contest, and probably much more.
I always wondered that because that's the kind of cars it puts the roof and
Oh, you like a convertible? That's a good looking fella. Come on.
Miss Possum Trot, Toby Scott.
Miss Possum Trot, Little Miss Adeline Osborne. Next, our 2024, gentlemen, give it up for all of our 2024 Miss Possum Trot. Okay, so they're going to count how many seconds the dog bark inside the circle.
On the tree.
On the tree. So they gonna raise the coon,
And the dog's gonna do his thing.
and then the dog gonna do his thing. By the way, Mr. President, you are aware this is the Possum Festival, right?
Coon festival.
I'm with you, coon. Get me out of here.
That's a hunting dog. That's how they let their owner know that they found the raccoon.
Paper over there. What's the official count of that dog barking? Not that dog, the other dog.
71.
Average of 71 barks on that dog.
Oh, look at this.
Oh, Lord, have mercy. Oh, God.
He's big.
Ride him, girl, ride him.
He's a big boy.
Oh, Lord, oh, I'm with you, raccoon. Get me. Oh, that's not really quite like a bark. It's more like open mouth and push air out. But he is on that tree, and the poor raccoon just trying to get can't quite find his balance. Meanwhile, the dog is still barking. Average time of that dog or barks was 88 barks on that one. Give that dog a hand.
Woo!
And poor raccoon is like,
Oh.
this is just the most stress I've ever seen. I come to a possum festival and all of a sudden, I'm the star. Hey bud, save it until, yeah, never mind, he's going. He's gone. No. Oh Lord, he did a pirouette. Just grab a hold of the tree and keep climbing. 95.
The girl beat the boy. That girl dog beat the boy dogs.
That raccoon say, hurry up and get me up out of here right now. He's like, does this door open? Hey, give me that rope. I'm gonna climb the rope. Give me the rope. He say, wait a minute, what are you doing?
Oh, poor raccoon.
And here we go. Oh! You'll do better just holding on to the tree. I saw his strategy. He said, let me pause for a minute in my barking.
They have to train these dogs to do this. Let's see.
That one's salivating at the mouth. He could taste the raccoon already. 93. So that's the second place right there so far for that one. Get ready. Here we go. That's a new kind of bark.
Listen to him.
There you go. Just stand right there. Don't you jump around or nothing. You do know he's on the other side of the tree, right? Again, each dog gets 1 minute to bark at the target. Our certified bark counters are calculating each bark. Time called. Hey, it's over. No, it's over. It's over for you. We check in now and see what the average bark was of that dog. Again, the bark count to beat right now is 95. And the average bark count, 95.5. So that last dog that just went just took the lead.
Let's see these dogs get their trophies.
2024 Pinewood Possum Trot Coon Dog Treeing Contest is Mr. John Goldman with his dog Dan at 95.5 barks. Coming.
You just
Our
stand
second
here.
place winner with 95 barks, Jack Bowman with Hillary.
Hold that trophy up there. There he is, ladies and gentlemen. His dog managed to do a half a bark to win. A half a bark. It was like, and congratulations to you. All right, there you go. And our second place winner right here, he had 95 barks out of his dog. I got a question for you, kind sir. How does it feel to know that you got second place because the other dog had a half a bark?
I've never heard of a half a bark.
You should have listened harder. He did it. Congratulations to you on that second place. All right.
But it's so good.
Yep. Let me see your dance moves. So, have you ever been to Pinewood? Would you visit the Possum Trot Festival? If you have any interesting information about Pinewood, I would love to hear from you. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, and as always, thanks for watching.